You're standing inside an operating theater at 3:12 a.m. The patient's heart has stopped. The monitor beside you is dragging out one long flat tone that echoes through the underground operating room like a warning. A man standing behind you slowly pulls back his jacket so you can see the gun on his waist. Then he quietly says, "If he dies, then you," and suddenly stops talking. Your gloves are soaked with sweat from the inside. 5 years earlier, none of this existed. You were just a scholarship kid from a poor neighborhood where everyone worked hard and still stayed broke. Your father repaired engines in a tiny garage behind your apartment building. Your mother cleaned office floors at night. When your medical college acceptance letter finally arrived after so many years, your family celebrated it like a miracle. You survived medical school more through discipline than talent. Long nights under library lights. Cheap vending machine coffee instead of meals. Sleeping in hospital lounges during residency because your apartment was too far away to drive back between shifts. And going that far every day was something you could not afford. You kept telling yourself again and again that everything would be worth it once you became a surgeon. But becoming a surgeon did not fix your life. At 34 years old, you were working at a small hospital as a junior heart surgeon. The hours were brutal. The salary looked good to normal people, but it disappeared the moment bills arrived. Your wife had stopped asking when you would finally slow down because she already knew the answer. Your son had school payments due. Your mother's medication costs kept increasing. Meanwhile, senior surgeons walked around the hospital wearing watches worth more than your yearly rent. And every time you looked at them, you worked even harder, believing one day you would reach that level too. But someone else was noticing all your hard work. One night after a 16-hour shift, you sat alone in the surgeon's lounge, staring at your phone screen. There were only $42 left in your account. Your coffee had already gone cold. Then your phone vibrated. Unknown number. You waited a few seconds before answering the call. The voice sounded calm. Educated. He said he represented private clients who needed special cardiac procedures performed outside traditional hospital systems. You were already exhausted, so you almost ended the call until he mentioned the payment. One surgery. More money than you made in 8 months at the hospital. You stayed silent for a few seconds. The man noticed. "Think about your family," he said softly before hanging up. He manipulated you a little, but you did not realize it. You were only thinking about the money. You ignored the number for 3 days, but you kept thinking about it. Your son's school fees, the house rent, the bills, all of it could be solved for just one surgery. But you had no idea what was really hiding behind that one surgery. Then your electricity bill bounced. Your wife quietly asked if everything was okay. You lied and said yes. That same night, you called the number back, and you agreed. They gave you an address and told you to come there. From outside, it looked normal. Just another office building downtown. But the moment you walked inside, everything felt wrong. The floors were spotless. The surgical equipment looked newer and more expensive than anything in your hospital. Security cameras watched every hallway. 2 armed men stood near the elevator pretending not to stare at you. They took you into the operating theater, and you were shocked because it looked even more luxurious than a private hospital operating room. Every piece of equipment that should have been there was already waiting. A nurse silently placed scrubs beside you. Then they finally explained the procedure. A wealthy overseas client needed an emergency heart transplant. No waiting list. No paperwork. No questions. A donor had already been arranged. That word got stuck in your head. Arranged. When they wheeled the donor past you toward another operating room, your stomach tightened. Young male. Maybe early 20s. Heavily sedated. For 1 second, you noticed restraints around his wrists before a staff member quickly covered them with a blanket. You should have walked away right there. Instead, you scrubbed in. A little later, you stood under bright surgical lights performing the most expensive surgery of your career while armed men silently watched from the corner of the room. Your hands moved automatically because of years of training. Clamp. Cut. Monitor pressure. Restart circulation. The patient survived. When everything was over, a tall man in a dark suit walked over and placed a thick envelope onto the steel table. The sound echoed softly through the room. You stared at the money. Then you picked it up and carefully placed it inside your medical bag. That was the real beginning. 3 weeks passed before the next call came. You had almost convinced yourself that the first surgery was just a one-time mistake. The cash from the envelope had already paid your overdue rent, your mother's medication bills, and your son's school fees that had been keeping him stressed. For the first time in years, your apartment felt quiet. No final warning notices on the kitchen counter. No late-night arguments with your wife about money. Just silence. Then at 1:14 a.m., while finishing your hospital shift, your phone vibrated again. Before you could even say hello, the same calm voice said, "We heard you work well under pressure." You stopped walking. The hallway outside the ICU smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. Nurses pushed stretchers past you while the voice on the phone calmly explained that another patient needed emergency surgery. Private operation. Same arrangement as before. More money this time. You refused immediately. The man did not argue. He simply said, "Of course, doctor." Think carefully, and ended the call. You ignored them for 2 days. Then your car transmission failed on the highway while driving home. 2 days later, your wife showed you another unpaid bill sitting on the kitchen table with shaking hands. Your son needed a medical procedure that the insurance company refused to fully cover. That night, you sat alone in the dark living room staring at your sleeping family. At 2:07 a.m., you called the number back. After your shift ended, a black SUV picked you up behind the hospital. Nobody inside introduced themselves. The windows were tinted so dark you could barely see outside, while the city slowly disappeared behind you street by street. 20 minutes later, the SUV stopped outside an underground medical facility hidden beneath an old warehouse near the docks. The moment you stepped inside, you realized this was no longer just desperate rich people skipping transplant waiting lists. This was something much bigger. Armed guards stood near every hallway. No staff member used names. Nobody carried phones. A nurse walked quickly beside you while explaining the patient's condition without making eye contact. Male, 47. Gunshot wound complications. Heart failure progressing rapidly. Then she quietly added, "The donor heart arrived 30 minutes ago." Arrived. Not donated. Arrived. Your stomach tightened again. Inside the operating room, the atmosphere felt strange in a way you could not fully explain. Too quiet. Too controlled. 2 armed men stood silently near the far wall, watching everything. A large digital clock above the monitors counted every second loudly enough for you to feel it inside your chest. The patient was already dying. You could see it in the monitor rhythms. Weak pressure. Failing circulation. At best, only minutes left. For one dangerous moment, your brain started justifying everything. If you walked away, this man would die. If you stayed, he would live. So you operated. Your gloves slightly stuck to your sweaty hands while the surgical lights burned above your face. Every movement felt heavier because of the silent men watching behind you. Clamp. Cut. Replace. Restart circulation. Your breathing slowly turned into pure focus while the room around you started fading away. Then finally, the heartbeat returned. Weak at first, then stronger. The monitor rhythm stabilized. Nobody in the room celebrated. One of the armed men simply nodded once before walking out without saying a word. An hour later, inside a private office upstairs, a thick envelope was placed into your hands. More cash than you had ever physically held before. The man in the suit smiled slightly while you stared at it. "You are valuable to us now, doctor." That sentence followed you all the way home. After that, the calls became regular. Different facilities. Different patients. Some wealthy foreigners used fake names. Some criminals looked like businessmen pretending to be normal. Sometimes organs arrived already packed in coolers with fake documents that you knew were fake before even reading them. But the money changed your life faster than your guilt could keep up. You moved your family into a bigger apartment with clean hallways and safe parking. You bought a new car. For the first time since your marriage began, your wife stopped stressing over bills. One night, while unpacking groceries, she asked where the money was coming from. You smiled without looking at her. Private consulting work. She wanted to believe you, so she did. But slowly, pieces of the truth started revealing themselves whether you wanted them to or not. One night, you walked past a storage room and saw 6 human organ transport coolers lined carefully against the wall while armed guards nearby spoke Russian. Another time, you overheard 2 coordinators discussing airport routes and customs officers being bribed. One patient briefly woke up during sedation and whispered, "Please don't send me back." That was the moment you fully understood. This was no longer illegal medicine. This was an international system. Smuggling routes, corrupt officials, stolen identities, human organs moving across borders like black market products. And by then, it was already too late to leave, because they knew your full name, your wife's name, your son's school, your home address. After that, you stopped asking questions. The call for the biggest surgery of your life came during a thunderstorm. You had just finished a 14-hour shift at the hospital when your phone vibrated inside your locker. The message contained only one address and one sentence. High-priority client. Tonight. $1 million. You were shocked seeing that much money for one surgery. But something also felt off. You did not want to do it, but you knew if you refused, they would hurt you and your family. And it was still $1 million. When the SUV picked you up, the atmosphere already felt different. The men inside were quieter than usual. Armed escorts sat in both front seats. One of them checked the mirror every few seconds like he expected someone to be following the vehicle. Rain slammed against the windows while the city lights blurred outside into long white and red streaks. Nobody spoke during the drive. This facility was not like the normal underground clinics. The place looked military. Private elevators, steel security doors, guards carrying rifles instead of pistols. Before even reaching the operating floor, you counted at least 12 armed men. That was when you realized the patient was important, and very dangerous too. Inside the preparation room, a coordinator finally explained the situation. A powerful gang leader needed an emergency heart transplant after a failed surgery overseas. Multiple governments already wanted him arrested. The people funding tonight's operation were risking millions just to keep him alive. And somehow, your hands were now responsible for all of it. Inside the operating room, the pressure felt suffocating. The patient's bodyguards silently watched from behind a glass partition while surgical lights burned into your eyes. Every monitor beep sounded louder than usual. You noticed one guard staring directly at your hands the entire time, like he was personally deciding whether you deserved to leave alive after surgery. Outside the room, more security teams constantly moved through the hallways. Something inside your chest felt wrong. Not medically. Personally. For months, you had forced yourself to believe these surgeries existed in some kind of gray area. Illegal, yes. Dangerous, yes. But still medicine. Still saving lives. Still surgery. But while standing there operating on a violent criminal protected by armed men, with a stolen heart sitting inside a transport cooler beside you, the lie finally started breaking apart. Meanwhile, somewhere outside that building, federal investigators were already tracking the network. You knew none of this. For almost 6 months, agencies had quietly followed financial transfers connected to illegal organ trafficking routes moving through multiple countries. Surveillance teams tracked suspicious private flights, offshore accounts, fake medical charities, missing donor reports. Slowly, your name started appearing between transactions and clinic records. At first, investigators thought you were just another surgeon taking hidden payments. Then they realized you appeared connected to nearly every major surgery inside the operation. But while the investigation grew around you, your life continued normally enough for you to ignore the warning signs. Until small things started changing. A black sedan began appearing outside your apartment building late at night. Unknown callers stayed silent whenever you answered the phone. Hospital administrators suddenly requested detailed financial reviews and payroll meetings that had never mattered before. One afternoon, a senior doctor casually asked how you suddenly afforded a car worth more than most surgeons made in 2 years. You smiled. You lied. And you kept working. Because by then, fear controlled your decisions more than greed did. You believed staying quiet would protect your family. You believed cooperation kept you alive. Most importantly, you believed the organization would never allow itself to collapse. That belief ended on a Tuesday night. The surgery had already started when it happened. You were halfway through another transplant inside a hidden operating room beneath a private medical warehouse near the docks. The patient's chest was open beneath the surgical lights. Nurses moved quickly around you while monitors pulsed steadily beside the table. Then suddenly, the building alarms exploded. Not medical alarms. Security alarms. For half a second, nobody moved. Then shouting erupted somewhere down the hallway. One of the armed guards near the operating room door grabbed his radio. Another reached for his weapon. The tension inside the room changed instantly from controlled professionalism into panic. And then the doors burst open. Federal agents flooded the hallway, yelling commands, while red targeting lasers cut across the walls. The sound hit your chest before your brain fully processed it. Armed officers moved through the facility with terrifying speed. Nurses screamed. Equipment crashed against the floor. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered. Federal agents. Hands where we can see them. Everything after that blurred together. Guards tackled to the ground. Doctors pulled away from operating tables. Patients rushed out by emergency teams. You stood frozen beside the surgical table with blood still covering your gloves while agents surrounded the room with weapons drawn. One officer forced you against the wall while another secured your hands behind your back. That was the exact moment reality finally hit you completely. You were never secretly helping desperate patients. You were part of an international criminal machine. And now everyone inside the building was collapsing with it. The media destroyed you within 48 hours. News channels replayed your photograph beside headlines calling you the black market surgeon. Reporters stood outside your apartment building speaking about illegal transplants, organized crime, and human trafficking investigations while your wife tried shielding your child from cameras outside the front door. Your medical license disappeared almost immediately. Years of education, years of training, gone in a single week. Prison came after the trial. Not violent movie prison. Worse. Slow prison. Quiet prison. The kind where every day feels identical enough to erase entire years from your memory. At night, you replayed surgeries inside your head while staring at concrete walls. Certain faces stayed with you longer than others. Patients who survived. Donors you never asked questions about. Operations where armed guards stood silently behind you while your hands kept working anyway. The hardest part was never fully knowing whether you had saved lives or destroyed them. Maybe both. Your wife visited during the first year. Then less often. Your son stopped making eye contact during visits once he became old enough to understand what people online said about you. Every conversation felt careful. Controlled. Like everyone was trying not to touch something painful sitting directly between you. Years passed quietly after that. When you were finally released, the world looked strangely fast. New phones. New cars. New faces everywhere. But your own life had stopped moving years earlier. Nobody hires former black market surgeons, especially ones whose faces once appeared on national television. Your license remained permanently revoked. Hospitals would not even allow you near operating rooms anymore. Eventually, a small private pharmacy agreed to hire you for overnight inventory work because the owner needed cheap labor more than he cared about your past. So that became your life. Unpacking medicine shipments at 2 a.m. stocking shelves quietly while younger pharmacists walked past you without recognizing who you used to be. One afternoon, your son visited the pharmacy after your shift ended. He was taller now, older than the version of him still frozen inside your memory. The conversation between you felt awkward in the way only lost years can create. You both tried, but time does not return itself just because someone regrets losing it. That night after work, you sat alone outside your apartment holding a paper cup of coffee while traffic moved quietly through the street ahead. And for the first time in years, you finally admitted the truth to yourself. You spent your whole life trying to become a surgeon so you could save people. And somehow, you became a man who kept dangerous people alive for money. The first time you held a human heart in your hands, it felt sacred. By the end, it felt transactional. You thought your skill would save your life. In the end, it became the reason you lost it.